I got friends only wanna talk business. I got expensive, cause winning's expensive. I got expensive, cause winning's expensive. I've been reading all the war, and I've been shutting down the stars.
And welcome to Put That Coffee Down, the freight sales show here at FreightWaves, where we talk about everything in sales when it comes to logistics, freight brokerage, carriers, freight tech, whatever it is in freight and logistics. We're talking about sales there because everyone has to sell to remain employed. Whether you're doing the selling or someone else is doing the selling, that's what you got to do. My name is Kevin Hill. Here, as always, with Richie Daigle. How are you doing today, Richie?
Yeah, doing well. We're flipped. For a while, you were in the studio, and I was being recorded from home. And now you're not in the studio, and I am in the studio.
I know I'm not in the studio. I'm not quite at home, but I'm not in the studio. I'm here in Southern California. I'm here in Palm Springs for the week. I decided to come out here to a desert during Memorial Day week, which I don't know if that's a good idea or a bad idea at this point. It's that heat has kind of hit me over the last 2 or 3 days. I mean, it's not really that hot, but just didn't. I don't know. It's just one of those weird things where I'm just like I'm dragging today a little bit. I have to get my energy up. I have been playing golf the last 2 or 3 days, and the heat has just gotten to me.
It's a dry heat, though, right? Just a dry heat.
It is dry heat, so it wasn't really that bad. I'm a little bit sunburned. I think that might be a little bit of it. I have fair skin, so sometimes that and age will catch up to you. But I'm not very far from your old stomping grounds. When you were a kid out here in the minor leagues playing for the Padres organization, where were you playing at?
Yeah, I was just down the road from where you're at now in Lake Elsinore, California. So we would play in a lot of the inland towns in California, like Rancho Cucamonga and Bakersfield and San Bernardino and Lancaster and San Jose, Visalia, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, Lake Elsinore was a great time there, and lots of good memories from Southern California.
Yeah, and all those sounds are very familiar with our audience, right? Because they're the Inland Empire. You have, up toward the valley, you have all the produce sections of the country. And then down here in the Inland Empire, Ontario, Riverside, Bakersfield sometimes, right? You have a lot of warehousing. So you have a lot of warehousing, a lot of those merchandise coming off the West Coast ports make it over here to Riverside and Ontario to get trucked out, railed out across the country. And we've seen that a lot in the last year with this huge boom of consumer spending. And it seems like it just won't stop, will it?
Yeah, it's all signs are pointing to that trend continuing, right? People are continuing to go out and spend money, and orders are continuing to stay elevated, and that stuff has to move. And so we're continuing to see that pressure coming in from imports and overall pressure on maintaining current rejection levels and volume levels. And this is all at a very high level, but all that to say, yeah, there's no end in sight as far as the data is concerned. And it's an exciting time.
It is an exciting time. There's a lot of action going on. That brings up a thing that we're going to be talking about with our guest later on in the show, Alex Schnitzer from Chariot Logistics. He's also a member of the Nashville Transportation Club. So we're going to talk to him about double brokering, because once activity gets really high and you're just searching for a truck and praying for a truck, just trying to do anything, sometimes you get a little weak and you start calling other brokers. Double brokering starts happening a little bit. You have your core of probably the legal stuff, and then you have things that will just get you in trouble. Not necessarily illegal, not even necessarily unethical, although a lot of it is unethical. But sometimes you're in a pinch and you start doing that, you get yourself in a lot of trouble. So we're going to talk to Alex about that today. But first, let's talk about potential. I know the consumer spending has hit its potential, certainly, but let's talk about personal potentials. And you have an example coming up with a famous psychiatrist, an Austrian, who who's done a number of research studies, but we're going to talk about one about purpose.
Yeah, there was an interesting article that came out from the Harvard Business Review last week about employees reaching their potential, especially during the pandemic. And you're seeing the high level synopsis here, but after surveying 14,500 U.S. workers, this was the synopsis or what they found. And what you're seeing, the last bullet point is the one that really jumps off the page to me, and that those workers that did feel like they were meeting their potential, they also saw that there was purpose and meaning in their work, and they were committed to their organization. There was some sort of just cause there. There's some sort of fulfillment above and beyond just compensation. And that immediately triggered a great book by Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, where he talks in depth about how meaning is one of these primary motivators, or maybe the primary motivator for humans, even more so than compensation. And that triggered another review from Princeton that came out a number of years ago, where they talked about $75,000 a year being that kind of magic number where money does kind of lead to happiness up until when you make that $75,000, and then beyond that, it gets pretty fuzzy. Money and happiness aren't really as correlated when you're making more than that. So I think that all of that to say, just the way my mind's working is, it's important that people have some understanding of why they're doing what they're doing, beyond just a paycheck. What are you providing? What goods and services are you putting out into the world? What problems are you solving? What are you doing to make things a little bit better, the world a better place? You personally, but then as well as your organization and your organization's mission. And, workers that are plugged into that seem to be feeling like they are more productive, or they're reaching their potential more so than workers who aren't plugged in to that level. So yeah, Kevin, those were just some of my thoughts reading through various articles over the long weekend. But curious to get your insight as well.
Yeah, purpose. I mean, a lot of people, especially when it comes to when you take your personal life, it's your purpose is very personal, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's very personal. It's a lot of times about family and duties and things that are non-monetary whatsoever. But when you take it to the work, and what's the purpose of work and employment, somewhere you're going to spend 40, 50, 60 hours a week of most of your life, everyone wants to assign the dollar tag to it, the money sign. Is it worth it? Getting into economics and reward and risk, but it all kind of goes together. I mean, you can't really separate the two. It's really what fulfills you. And sometimes it's not money that does that. Maybe it's some altruistic reason. Maybe it's helping others. And the most successful salespeople that I know, their purpose is to help others, to create value, to build things, not necessarily for the monetary, strictly the monetary facts. I will say, I've done this a couple times, and I think by the time you get to 40 or certainly 50, you've probably done it a couple times, is that you've taken an opportunity just for the money, right? It's like, I'm going to base this decision on money, whether it's staying somewhere maybe sometimes, or leaving, going somewhere else. We're just like, I'm just a hired gun. I'm just going to go do it for the money. It really never works out. It really doesn't. If that's your reason, your sole reason is, I'm going to do it just for the money, I'm going to get into sales just for the money, you're not going to get very far. You have to enjoy the process. We talk about it all the time, Richie, right? You got to enjoy the grind. You got to enjoy the process. You got to be in the present. And that's all about purpose. If your purpose doesn't conform to what you're doing on a daily grind, you're never going to make it to where that money is actually a payoff.
100%. And I think the money, you can kind of think about it like lighter fluid. We're just coming off of Memorial Day weekend. A lot of people were out there and grilling, and it's great for getting the fire started and building up that big flame and that initial passion, but you need purpose for that slow burn that's going to take you throughout the entire career, the long-term, fulfillment that you're going to get from that position. And, that's one way to think about it. And I think it does kind of work, based on where you are in life. What's your situation? There are a lot of situations where it does make sense for money to be that primary motivating factor. And that's what's going to be getting me going. And then you get on later on in your career, and now you start thinking about your legacy. You start thinking about how are you impacting the world at large, and your mindset starts changing a bit. I read a study about presidents. First 4 years, they're focused on getting reelected. And then second-term presidents are more focused on their legacy. I do think that it is possible, though, to mesh the two. You don't have to be either or. You can be motivated by both. You can be pursuing bigger gains, monetarily, along with building your legacy all at the same time. And I think those two can coincide. It's never too early to start on your legacy.
Oh yeah, I'm not dissing money whatsoever. It's always great to have. It's always great to have. So I'm not dissing that at all. But I will say, money's great. It's how you keep score. Sometimes it's nice. You can enjoy things. It's freedom as well. But at the end of the day, you can't. You have to have day-to-day purpose, because your bank account's not going to change day-to-day. But your mood will, your emotions will. So you really have to enjoy what you're doing. The more you enjoy it, the more time you spend at it, the better you get at it, the more you're going to be compensated. But that takes years to build up. And a lot of times, if you do something just for the money, you're mentally skipping over all the work that you have to put in to really justify that money. And if you're just doing something solely for the money, you won't get to the expertise or the situation, the productivity, right? That you need to get that money, which is our next segment here. I think I switched our segments around a little bit, but this is about reaching potential, right? How employees reach potential. And your organization has a lot to do that. Your personal mind frame has a lot to do that as well. But this is a Harvard Business Review article that you sent over to me. You were you're busy bee this Memorial Day weekend reading different articles. So thank you so much, Richie. But here's a little prelude of that. And we have this up here. Even before the COVID-19 pandemic, American workers are struggling to reach their full potential. In a national survey we conducted of more than 14,500 workers across industries in 2017, approximately 85% of them were not working at 100% of their potential. In fact, only 15% of workers said they were. Moreover, 16% said they were using less than 50% of their potential. So it raises a question, how do you, as an organization, how do you lift your employees up, empower them to reach their potential, Richie?
Yeah, and just going down that list, having clear expectations. When employees know what their charge is, what their goals are, what their purpose is, what are they trying to do, and having really clear, in-depth expectations there, then I know exactly what I need to do. I know how I need to structure my day. I can take care of the rest to make sure that I'm set up for success. And then also feeling safe to ask questions, right? You don't have to know all the answers, but you need to know where the answers live, and you need to feel like you are in an environment where you can go ask people to find the information that you need to solve problems. And then, not suppressing people with too many, micromanaging people or setting up lots of check-in meetings, or that's been we've talked about that in previous episodes, where the importance of trusting your employees and trusting people to go out and do their jobs, and not keeping them under the thumb with lots of unnecessary meetings and so forth. And then, meaningful work, and then before meaning and work, supervisors. Supervisors who are in tune with what their employees are doing. If the management team really understands what's going on or what the frontline employees are going through, then they're going to better be able to position themselves to be supportive. And when you have a front line that feels like they're supported, feels like they can be creative with their problem solving, feels like they know where they can find all the answers that they're looking for, they have clear expectations, and they find meaning in their work, then that's a front line that is well equipped to go out and maximize their potential in terms of productivity.
You're exactly right. And in this Harvard Business Review, this article had a great example of that. And that's when COVID first hit, looking at hospitals and nursing staffs. And when you really look and you remember back in those days, especially, there was so much confusion. It was really an emergency. There's a natural confusion of how to treat patients. What's right and what's wrong. You're overworked, overtaxed, and then I think one of the nurses applied for PTO because he or she was just completely burned out, but she didn't actually put in her request correctly, and it was turned down. So you have really high stress situations, and you have bureaucracy and red tape and unknowns, which crush the nurses down. And they also went into the article as well. The fact that nurses became less sure of everyday decisions as well, right? Just the normal type of decisions they used to make every single day like clockwork because of all the confusion and abstractions there was a notable difference in their decision-making ability even through their normal typical things that they used to make decisions on quite frequently and confidently. They just completely lost their confidence in making any decision whatsoever.
Yep, 100%. And you saw that all that stress and that difficulty led to this environment where you lost trust, there was more uncertainty, and that led to a lack of focus. And so now you can feel that stress, and you don't have any sort of focus with what to do with that anxiety and that stress and how to act and how to take a step in any kind of meaningful direction to make things better. And that can just compound itself and create this dizzying effect where even, like you said, very basic tasks can all of a sudden come under fire or seem like you want to question those as well. And so it's the importance, especially in high stress situations. And I think we're seeing this in transportation right now with the elevated volumes, capacity as tight as it is. It's a stressful time for all parties in the transportation industry at the moment. And I think it's important to, now more so than ever, to keep those open lines of trust and that open communication channels, and start building ways to keep people focused so that you can start chipping away at the mountain that is the current situation and create an impact. So
it is.
Good stuff.
It's all about confidence, right? I mean, whether you're in sales or pitching, athletics, or really anything you do, you have to have confidence in your decisions. You have to have confidence in what you're doing is on the right track. And if in organizations and teams that you lose that empowerment or that confidence, you have to regain that back. And part of that is ownership, right? Having people own their processes, own their decisions, making sure that they're confident in that. So it's a huge part of life, definitely. You're talking about Sonar and you're talking about the freight markets, and let's jump over to Sonar and see what your chart of the week here is for. Put that coffee down.
Yeah, so I picked out a lane. We hear all the time in Sonar on the sales side. We're out there preaching the importance of real-time information and real-time data and why it's so vital, especially in today's market conditions, to have real-time visibility. And a question that comes out oftentimes is that sounds great, but tell me, like, show me how that works. Like, how exactly am I going to make that tangible? What is a way where real-time visibility is going to impact my bottom line directly? And when in lane signal, which is an application within Sonar, for either refrigerated or dry van lanes, we can pull up this analysis. We can plug in any three-digit zip code, as long as it's 250 miles or greater, and you can click on van or reefer. What I noticed here is for this specific lane from Los Angeles to Chicago for refrigerated, if you'll look at the week-over-week percent change, it's up almost 20%. And if you are operating in the spot market for refrigerated freight on this lane today, and you are using any other way or platform for understanding what rates are, understand that all the other platforms out there in the marketplace are going to be lagging by 7 days, sometimes 2 weeks. And here we're showing you that the market on this lane is up nearly 20%. So if you're a broker, this is a big deal because your margin is at risk here. If you are an owner-operator, you want to understand what the value of your truck is on this specific lane. And if you're a shipper, you want to be able to understand how to navigate the marketplace on this lane as well. So, really good information here. Of course, we can see that from today looking forward to next week in the forecast, we see market conditions are forecasted to loosen a bit, but they certainly have tightened substantially from where they were a week ago for refrigerated freight specifically on this lane. So, thought this would be a good way to highlight the importance of real-time information.
Yeah, definitely. In the forecasting models, if you're basing things off 7 to 14 days ago through freight bills and things like that, then you have that lag, and you can forecast out maybe next week, but you can't catch up to that forecast, right? So if that forecast changes today, if things happen today, that's going to cause that forecast to move next week. If you're using real-time or near real-time information, then you can adjust it on the fly. But if you're using things that are 7-14 days in the past, it's hard to adjust in the short term. And we do know that, it's a very volatile market, and it's been that way since last summer, since about this time last summer, heading out of Memorial Day. And it's likely to certainly become even more volatile as we get back to normality here. I think here in California, June 15th, they're lifting all the COVID restrictions. They're probably one of the last places in the U.S. to do that. So it's going to be very important, coming out of that, especially what we see in the freight markets and in consumer behavior, especially. We talk a lot about on FreightWaves TV here. We talk a lot about the stimulus spending. We talk about the mixed shifts of consumer spending between services and tangible goods, which is more trucked. And we've been talking about inflation for a number of weeks now, especially. So we have all those things coming in, and we'll see what behavior is, what the economy does, and see if we see greater periods of volatility on the upside or maybe volatility on the downside as well, depending on really on those three topics right there. Inflation, mix in consumer spending, and stimulus payments. So it's going to be very interesting. We're going to see a lot of movement in the markets coming up in the second half of the year, and real-time data is the key.
Yeah, we're seeing big week over week, volatility on a lot of lanes right now. And sometimes there's a rhyme and a reason, sometimes there isn't. Sometimes it kind of makes sense, sometimes it's pretty surprising. And that, like you said, that's the importance of having that real-time visibility, because as the marketplace overall gets more and more volatile, there's more changes happening and what's going on with imports and everything else. These types of shifts are happening all the time, and the brokerages in the world that are able to stay out ahead of that volatility are, stand to, kind of reap the rewards of that by being on the right side and always being proactive. On the flip side, brokerages that are behind and reacting and getting stuck, wasting a lot of time negotiating where they don't have leverage and losing on their margin when conditions like what we're seeing on that LA to Chicago reefer lane happen, they're poised to, suffer some losses or really have to work a lot harder to find that margin. So, really interesting times to come over the next 6 months for sure.
It is, and for the freight brokers that aren't using real-time data, using old market data, you're going to get into positions where you can't find trucks at the rate that you quoted at the right price. And what does that do? It makes you a little bit desperate. And we have Alex Schnitzer here from Chariot Logistics, and we're going to talk about desperate brokers right now and how to protect your customers against these double brokering type of situations, which I tell you what, it just gets everybody in trouble. You're going to get burnt very quickly if you're double brokering, if you're doing things that causes you to lose control of your transactions, because the less control you have over them, the more bad things that will happen, and they do happen almost invariably. That they certainly do. So, Alex, welcome to the show.
Hey guys, appreciate you having me. How are y'all doing?
We're doing great.
Doing well. Good to see you again, Alex.
We are doing great.
Good deal.
Yeah. So, before we get started, Richie and Alex know each other from a different industry, right? You guys used to work together in restaurants. Is that right?
Yes, sir. I mean, I'm sure you know, but Richie has had like 17 different lives. He's been a professional baseball player. He's been a extraordinary server. I mean, the man does. What can this guy not do? That's what I want to know.
Very, very, very well pointed out. Definitely. So Alex, please introduce yourself. Tell us what you do at Chariot Logistics, and then also talk about the Nashville Transportation Club as well.
Yes, sir. So I'm Vice President of Sales and Customer Service at Chariot Logistics here in Nashville, homegrown, organically grown 3PL freight brokerage, about a little over 9 years old, which in the freight brokerage industry seems like 100 years. But we are very proud to say that we're privately owned, and which allows us to keep our fiduciary responsibilities first and foremost to the customer, especially in a very volatile market that we have now. I'm also on the board of directors with the National Transportation Club here in Nashville, which is in its second full year. And our first year was incredible, full head of steam, and then the lovely pandemic comes into play and completely just derails a little bit of our networking events and that kind of stuff. But just having to get a little creative with how we can get that name out there, which seems to be the name of the game with surviving the pandemic in general, just being creative.
It is definitely that's the name of the game, and you guys have a golf day coming up in Nashville in the next week, right?
Yes,
and right
sir.
there it is up on our screen. Can you give us a little bit of details of this activity and this day coming up on June 7th, a week from today,
sir.
right?
Next Monday. Yes, sir. A week from yesterday, technically. We're all still living Monday with the holiday throwing us through a loop. But it's our inaugural golf scramble. We were going to have one last year, but again, the pandemic kind of screwed that up. But it's our first one. We currently have about 7 or 8 spots left. So we're very, very pleased with that aspect. The interest has been incredible. We have a handful of sponsorships available as well. We have a LinkedIn page that has our link for signups and sponsorship info if anybody's interested. You see the golf at TC of Nash email down there as well. It is we're a nonprofit organization. It's a charity tournament going towards our scholarship fund. That's one of our big parts of the National Transportation Club is we want to network, empower, and educate, and we are going to support scholarship funds for individuals wanting to get into this crazy industry. First, we're going to advise them to probably pick something else, but if they're crazy like us, then try to help them with their schooling. One aspect for the scholarship type stuff, and keep it regional and around the Middle Tennessee area. There's a lot of collegiate programs that have very good logistics and supply chain programs and want to be able to support local people for that endeavor.
So yeah, Kevin, I will say Alex sent me an invitation, and I passed it on to one of my colleagues. I won't be able to make it, but that's probably a good thing because my golf game is kind of like an Easter egg hunt. I don't know exactly what direction the ball is going to go. I just know that it's going to go somewhere, and that if there are houses nearby, they're in danger. But so we will have some representatives there, and I know that our team's excited. But let's jump into it, Alex. Let's talk about double brokering, and I'd love to hear your definition of that term. I know there's a lot of definitions floating around, like a lot of things, but it's always good to define the term first before we jump in and really start digging into it. So, what is double brokering to you? And and is it good? Is it bad? Let's kick it off there.
Well, that you bring up a great point, because so many people just get caught up on double brokering being the scam aspect, the unknown. The true definition, to make it as simplistic as possible, is when a carrier accepts a load under one MC and runs it under a different MC, the load is double brokered. The why doesn't matter, because there's several different issues that can come up. Obviously, one of the biggest that gets the most attention and the messiest is with a scam. You have a carrier that runs a load and ends up not being able to get paid because the person they got the load from disappears. But again, a lot of people think that that's your example of double brokering and everything else is okay, especially if, the carrier knows. Well, it comes down to liability. And if you don't have the necessary safety ratings and paperwork for a specific carrier or MC because it's run under a different one, and something happens, the liability is going to come back on the broker, and they're not going to have a case because they didn't do the due diligence, or the perception is going to be there that there wasn't due diligence done.
So Alex, does that definition include, if I'm a freight broker and I go to another freight broker, and I know they're a freight broker, right? And they just broker the load as normal, right? That's double brokering as well? Because that's my definition of double brokering does include that, even though it's run on, the other broker's MC number. They're getting the carrier. I don't know who the carrier is, so I mean, there's a lot of problems with that in itself, right? Because you're not actually vetting the carrier. Someone else is vetting the carrier, and you're trusting that happens, but you're just piling more risk onto yourself.
100%. And I think you see that, that example is more prevalent than ever now. But to answer the question, first and foremost, yes, that is double brokering. Now, there's ways to legalize that agreement or to limit the risk. There's broker contracts that can get signed. And again, it's just passing the liability down. But, I want to know every single one of my customers, every single load, we want to know exactly where that load is at all times. I mean, that's what we sell. That's why we pay these fancy tracking services, all this, all these fees and stuff, so we can find out where the load is. But if we don't know who is carrying the load, we can't set up all that kind of stuff, and we can't, any broker can't provide the service that their specific customers are expecting. And again, there's lots of ways that it happens. There's ways to mitigate it. There's ways to make it less complicated, or have your cake and eat it too. But it's a slippery slope for me. And if you're doing it a little bit, you're leaving yourself liable and in jeopardy of doing it everything.
And this was really highlighted by one of our writers, Clarissa Haas, did an expose. It's freight fraud, purchasing double brokering scheme like a game of whack-a-mole. And that's the first part of the story. The second part of the story, which is very interesting as well, it's not quite completed. It'll be out early next week, I think the day of your golf tournament, June 7th. Wow. And that dives more into the real illegal aspects of double brokering. It's about 10 different MC numbers in one address associated with 2 or 3 people with the same last name. And all they're doing is opening up new MC numbers and USDOT numbers to create just an exponential amount of shell companies where they can hide what they're doing. And it makes it very difficult to track down, whether it be a safety violation or a load that doesn't show up. Someone doesn't get paid, especially the carrier, because that original broker is still kind of on the hook for paying that carrier.
Oh, not kind of.
Even if they don't even get booked. Yeah, they are on the hook, right? And it just really makes it very difficult to try. And maybe load held hostage. A lot of bad things can happen, especially whenever you don't have control, you don't have visibility into the actual carrier who's hauling those goods.
Absolutely. It's again, it just can get so messy and cause the financial aspects obviously get all the publicity, if you will, against double brokering. But it's just, even if you catch it right before it's happening, and all that kind of stuff, it still just takes so much time, and there's so many things that it causes and negative effects from having a load double brokered on top of the monetary issues.
So I think this is an opportunity where both of you have more experience in the logistics industry than myself, and so I'm just going to take the back seat as the newcomer and just ask some basic questions here, because what I'm hearing is that double brokering is like adding unnecessary people to the game of telephone. It's just going to muddy the messaging, and it can create all kinds of confusion and problems for expectations and tracking loads and service standards and so forth. So I see all these downsides, and I can see the reasons why people might want to do it if they're wanting to be nefarious or if they're wanting to launder money. But and that's fair. But I'm really interested with brokers that have good intentions, that are wanting to do the right thing, that choose to go down this path of double brokering. Why? Why take on all of this risk? Alex, what's your experience on why people might be making that decision right from the beginning to go down that road?
So I think I'm going to break that question up into 2 parts. One, the brokers finding it necessary, and then carriers. Brokers finding out a necessity is, from a sales standpoint, it's more freight, right? You come into a situation, even when you're not in a volatile market, it's not a specific load of where a lot of companies maybe are single sourced from one of the bigger 3PLs or a 4PL, and the only way to service that customer is through that said 4PL or 3PL. So again, it's in that dynamic that is technically double brokering, but there is layers and layers of contracts that you have to go through and on both sides to protect everybody involved. And it simulates, a normal broker to carrier relationship, because you're dealing with the bigger 3PL or the 4PL. Then that is, your normal, like, no extra urgency stuff like that coming in. And then I think the other is just the urgency, if somebody has a fear of potentially losing an account or having a major issue on a load, they're going to do whatever they can to get that load covered, and maybe make some bad decisions, or don't know that it's getting double brokered, but maybe potentially don't ask the right questions, or just kind of, have a shorter script to get the load covered. And then where people think it's okay on the carrier side all the time is when you have a smaller to medium-sized trucking company. We run into this every single day, where they're giving it to a friend who, is a 4 or 5 unit trucking company or something like that. And for whatever reason, they're not set up in our system, or don't have all their paperwork intact maybe, or it's just easier, right? Manpower is a thing we get, like, hey, just take this load for me, give it to me, and we're good. I'll run it. Well, a lot of times you run into the reason why they're doing that is because they tried to get the load directly from us, but they didn't pass our qualifications, or they had that same thing happen at other brokers, right? Whether it was their conditional safety rating or their safety numbers or lack of inspections or whatever. So it's forcing them to go through somebody else. But again, you won't believe the amount of trucking companies that we talk to on a daily basis that think that scenario is perfectly fine and legal because everybody's in the know. There's no scam. There's 100% transparency on the carrier side. Now, that transparency is not there from carrier to broker all the time, unless you're asking the correct calculated questions, as our staff is trained up and does on a daily basis. But that's why you have to ask questions, especially in a market like this where there's so much freight. It's so hard to book each and every load. You have to slow down and follow your processes and your mitigation steps for double brokering, or it's going to happen because it is such a broad definition.
And there are ways that, and they're not really that complicated there's entities out there. It's easy to create entities that really make what you're doing very opaque. And a couple, you mentioned 4PLs and 3PLs, right? And they're pretty stringent about separating those two entities in-house, right? There's kind of that wall of separation between them, and that's what they've promised their shippers and certainly other transportation providers that work with them. But you also have you have dispatch services. You have people that you call and they try to give you 3 MC numbers, whichever one works the best, and you have to worry about here we go again type of things, and then you just have your normal course of business. I think one of the worst ones it happened before I got to this brokerage, but there's a used jet engine, like a GE jet engine, that was going from somewhere in the U.S. to Mexico. And what you have is there's like 6 people in this transaction, starting with freight forwarders, which are 3PLs as well. But they're doing the international side where there's 2 or 3 entities doing the domestic side. Well, the engine got to wherever it was in Mexico, didn't work, $1 million lawsuits flying around. And that's when everyone kind of realized that they're in this chain of events that they didn't really even know about. That it was so. I think there was like six brokerages involved, or something like that, and everyone just got sued. So you have these confusing situations about when you get into these double brokering scenarios.
100%. And again, it's one of the more unfortunate things, and I'm sure anybody else listening to this has been in this scenario would agree, is every single time that we've have a double broker or had one in the past, it's when you step back and go through the list of everything that happens, you look at something and you're like, man, if this question was asked, or if this was extra verified, or if we made this extra phone call, the shoulda, woulda, couldas. And it's just, that's one thing that makes it so hard is like you said, they put so many, every time you add an extra layer from a dispatching service or an extra broker or 4PL, there's just another layer of communication. Like Rich alluded to earlier, the game of telephone, it just gets muddier and it's a complete mess. And one of the biggest ways that we have found to no questions asked, just make sure the truck is who they say they are and all that kind of stuff, is asking point blank the driver what is the name of the company on the side of his truck, and then verifying with the insurance company the exact COI. Don't get me wrong, we have probably 30 other questions that have to get asked, but there's no way to fake either of those two and to get on, to still double a broker load. And 9 times out of 10, when there's a question and one of those two questions get asked and we don't get the answer we want, that load was going to get double brokered if we didn't find out, who's the truck driving or who's the driver driving for, and is this insurance copy, legitimate? Is it a real certificate, or is it just something that somebody hacked up on the computer?
So I got two questions for you, Alex. And the first question is, how do you handle these expectations in this conversation with your shippers? I mean, obviously they want to avoid these situations, and I'm sure they're aware that this sort of thing happens. So the first question is, how do you set expectations and build trust with your shippers? And then the second question is, what do you do in the situations where capacity is tight and the only option you can find to cover a load is going to be a high probability of double brokering? Like, what are you doing in those scenarios? Are you going down that road because you can't find another option, or are you taking other avenues to try to provide service?
So, two very good questions, very tough questions as well. But the first one, we don't run from it. As far as, whether it's a new customer, we're getting to that's in our sales pitch. That's one of our offerings, is our carrier vetting process, not just for double brokerings, but for safety and all that kind of stuff. So it's something that we, again, I'm not going to sit here and say that's the number one thing we talk about and, all that stuff, but we don't run from it. It's a conversation that we take head on because it happens. And, as a broker, it's talked about all the time, right? We don't own assets. We own communication and processes. And that's a huge opportunity for a salesperson to sell their expertise as a broker on that one granular topic. Hey, these are the how many ever steps. We show our questionnaires that our carriers have to ask and the things that we're looking for to spot it in the sales process to our shippers and our potential customers of how we are going to care for their freight and not let it fall victim. And then, unfortunately, it still happens sometimes. So we have very strict processes to, again, don't hide from it. As soon as it happens, we make our customers aware. One of the big problems with it is a lot of times you don't find out about it till months down the road. So you've already paid the original carrier and the original broker that accepted the load, who you thought was a carrier, and then double brokered it out. And that carrier comes calling for their money because they haven't been paid, and the person they took the load from has not answered a call since they took the load, type thing. Did that answer the first question pretty much?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, that's good stuff.
Yeah, and on a quick follow-up before we get a second question is, shippers aren't shippers responsible for payment of their goods if you get into that double brokering type of scenario, and the carrier is not paid? I mean, ultimately, it's the shipper. So that's always an awkward conversation to have with your shipper. Is that the carrier is reaching out to them? They might not be ultimately responsible. I think they are, though, but they're certainly going to get contacted by them, and that's certainly 100%. Not going to be good for your reputation.
And that's one thing that a lot of these collection agencies and collections law firm types have figured out big time, that if they've got a carrier in a double brokering issue, the first thing they need to do is go to the highest contact they can find of that customer and start a mess of email chains, and that's going to get, that specific load will get paid that day or the next for sure, because then the customer's calling me saying, hey, what's going on, what is this, and all that kind of stuff. So to answer your original question, Kevin, it really depends on the contracts that you have signed with the customer, what's in there, what does their language say, who's ultimately liable. As a broker, I know a lot of contracts that liability comes straight to us the second we sign the contracts. Ultimately, if everybody disappears, goes out of business or whatever, then the customer is ultimately liable. But as a service that we provide and a need for customers, that's one liability thing that just gets passed down to the brokers like a lot of other stuff. And that's why it's so important to protect yourself against the stuff, which is probably a good parlay into your second question. Richie, we will never never, ever knowingly enter a double broker situation. Doesn't matter how hot the load is, losing customer type. That's just something that we're not going to do because of the liability. And we're also not going to use that as an excuse, right? We're not going to say, hey, I missed your load because my only option was a double broker carrier. Like, that's kind of not fair, right? That's taking advantage of the system. And for us, and I'm sure a lot of people are like this, if the load's that close to being in jeopardy, our customer was going to know well before your 30-minute cutoff, before they close, and double broker and carriers and all that kind of stuff. Is being transparent about where the load is and where we are with capacity and that kind of stuff. But to point blank answer your question, if the only option we have is a double broker situation or something we know, hey, this isn't adding up for sure, then we're not going to enter that. Now, if it's more the situation where everybody's in the know, if there's a specific reason why the carrier running the load cannot get approved through our current qualifications, we figure out why. Is it possible? Do they need to go do something, get leased under this other insurance to make that possible? Is there something we can do in a timely manner to make an unqualified carrier a qualified carrier? That's what we would look to do. But again, if there's no way to give them the necessary qualifications to let them run it directly for us, then it's just something that we cannot afford to do. Because, I mean, even if it is losing a customer, God forbid something happens with that load, they get in a wreck, then, oh my gosh, the liability is all straight on you. There's no contracts. Your insurance company has got 15 kinds of fine print to where you've neglected and yada, yada. So you're talking about most people think about the negative financial aspects from a double brokering just being the freight cost. Well, that's if everything goes good with the load and it was delivered. The load wasn't delivered. You have, what the freight cost. If there was an accident, you got those costs. I mean, it can just go from, a few $1,000s to 7 figures overnight.
And this was really a complicated go ahead, Richie, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to comment and just kind of summarize. Like, what I'm hearing is, like, you do it right or you just don't do it at all. And if you can find a way to get it done right, then sweet, let's do it. And if you can't, then we're not making exceptions. And then the other thing I'm hearing you say, Alex, is communication's key, and managing expectations across the board, both on the shipper side as well as the carrier side, and making sure that you are, to your point, handling and owning those communications throughout, so that everybody understands what's happening. Those are my takeaways there. I think it's good stuff, Kevin. I'm sure you got some more to add.
Yeah, this is just it's a complex issue because we haven't even gotten into some of the other finer points. Trip leasing, right? If you talk about trip leasing, that's a very complex kind of other double brokering situation that is it's legal, right? I mean, you have maybe an owner operator joining a carrier for one trip, and it's called a trip lease, and it's a little bit different from brokering, but it's the same outcome as that. And it's kind of those situations where Alex had mentioned where he gives a carrier gives it to a buddy, someone else, because they can set up an actual transaction for that the broker and shipper doesn't even know about. But it's not strictly illegal, and there's a lot of fine points in. None of us are lawyers, so take everything with a grain of salt. We're not giving legal advice here, but just know that the murkier the situation, the more variables, the more parties that are involved in any load, your risks go up exponentially. And, I've seen it, I've done it. I did a double brokering once very early in my career. It was, I couldn't find a truck. It was up in Fort McMurray. The first guy had an automatic transmission and couldn't climb the hill. I never thought that would even be an issue, but it did turn out to be that way. And I double brokered it. Someone said they were going to have to deadhead someone 100 miles. I went to my customer, got more money out of them for that deadhead. And guess who showed up the next morning? The same driver that couldn't do the load.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
So that's one of those things that can happen. But we're running out of time here. So there's I'm sure everybody has some great war stories. So I'll post this out on LinkedIn. And basically just you can comment there with your favorite story of how you got caught in some kind of double brokering kind of situation, because if you're young to the industry, there's a lot of places that you can actually get yourself into a lot of trouble with that, because they don't have the processes and procedures like Alex does. But thanks so much, Alex, for coming on the show. How does our audience reach out and contact you directly?
So I have a LinkedIn profile. Mr. Alex Schnitzer will pop right up. And then for the National Transportation Club, the golf@tcofnash.com is our email address. You can hit me up on LinkedIn, send a direct message or any of that kind of stuff.
Awesome.
Cool. Thank you very much. Thanks again.
Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it.
Good to see you, Alex.
You bet. So Richie, you're very lucky you don't know much about double brokering, because it's a lesson of hard knocks sometimes.
Yeah,
you can either go through it yourself or you can watch other people around you go through it. But yeah, it's dangerous.
The first thing as the conversation was unfolding, the first thing that came to mind was a game of telephone, right? And how if you just throw an additional 5 people into the line, then the message that the person at the end of the line is going to get is going to be a lot different, and you're just muddying the waters. And you think about environments, right? And not necessarily trying to control outcomes, but if you can manage your environments, typically your outcomes will take care of themselves. And it's kind of, you're creating a poor environment, or an environment where the probabilities of problems arising are higher than they need to be. And that's speaking to the situations where you have people with the best of intentions who are just trying to problem solve and looking for a quick way out. Of course, it's a different conversation for those that do this on purpose for nefarious reasons. But it just seems like it might seem like an easy way out or an easy button, but like is the case with most easy buttons, they actually make things a lot muddier and can make it a lot worse.
It can, and this is one of the rackets that is played in the freight markets, unload boards, and it does get really murky, especially 8-9 years ago, when visibility was everyone making phone calls, trying to track down trucks. It was very difficult. But there's a lot of rackets. There's catch, fuel advances. Fuel advances have gotten people. There are people who still MCs and just complete fraud of acting like an employee of that company, giving out MC numbers, getting some kind of advance, or maybe hiring the trucking company without paying them to deliver loads. I mean, it runs a complete gamut of different frauds and cons that are out there. So it's very important to make sure that you're dotting all the I's, crossing all the T's, making sure that your processes and procedures are up to date, and that everybody in your organization is following them. Definitely. So next week we have our next virtual conference. Is the Small Fleets and Owner Operators Summit. We'll be talking about owner operators issues, and we'll be talking about developing those relationships with freight brokers, with shippers, with AB5 coming out of California, and what those impacts are about financing your operations, factoring, about owning your own equipment, leasing it. So it's going to be a great discussion. It's next Wednesday, June 9th. Starts at 9 a.m. and it goes to roughly 4 or 5 p.m. We have some great sessions in there with the truck as well. Be talking about the business of owner operators. And then actually, it's Tuesday. I keep on thinking it's Monday, but it is Tuesday. So we have Great Quarter Guys coming up at 3 p.m. with Andrew Cox. These holidays just really get to me sometimes, right, Richie? But yeah, so we have Andrew Cox coming up at 3 p.m. on Great Quarter Guys. And then don't miss out on our daily morning show, FreightWaves Now. It comes on starting at 9 a.m. every single weekday, so you can catch us tomorrow at 9 a.m. And with that, we are out of Put That Coffee Down.
I got friends only wanna talk business. I got expensive, cause winning's expensive. I got expensive, cause winning's expensive. I've been reading all the war, and I've been shutting down stars.